Students may access Arts Edge on the internet at this address for 2 weeks after the program with questions for the artists.
Hello. Welcome to another program in the Performing Arts series produced by the Prince William County Public Schools and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. My name is Jim Haba. I'm a poet, a member of the faculty at Rowan University in New Jersey, and coordinator of the Geraldine R. Dodge Poetry Festival. Today I have the privilege of moderating the program titled Poet as Performer, featuring our special guest, poet Naomi Shihab Nye. I wanted just to say a word or two about poet before I introduce Naomi. A poet comes from the Greek verb which means to make. And it means to make in a particular way, the way in which bees make hives, the way in which birds make nests, the way in which beavers make dams. That kind of making which comes out of innermost pattern, innermost resource. Because language certainly is one of the defining features. It may be the defining feature, but it's certainly one of the defining features of our species. It's not surprising that we use the word poet to describe somebody who makes things out of language, and that we use the word poem to describe the most exquisite thing made out of language. And Naomi Nye is certainly a poet in such a sense. She's a wonderful, almost infinitely resourceful maker. She makes essays, she makes novels, she makes picture books, she makes anthologies, and she makes her own poems. She has 2 books of poems currently in print, Red Suitcase and Words Under the Words, and she has a new book of poems coming out this summer called Fuel. She's from St. Louis, Missouri, and she's lived in Jerusalem and for the last 30 years in San Antonio, Texas. It's a great pleasure to have with us Naomi Shihab Nye. I wanted to open up today's program with a little conversation about poems, about where they come from. In a poem of Naomi, she says that poems hide from us, that we have to know how to find them. I suspect also we have to let ourselves be found by the poems. But I wanted to ask Naomi, where do poems come from?
Good morning, Jim. Great to be here with you all. I've always felt from the time I was a very small child that poems came from everything in our lives if we invited them to come, if we listened to things in a certain way, if we paid attention in a certain way. And I wanted to tell you a little story. Not long ago, I was standing on the steps of the Chicago Art Institute, waiting for a ride to pick me up. And I became aware that a man on the same step as my own step was speaking to the air. There was no one around him listening. He was just lecturing, standing there in a baggy gray suit and speaking. And because my ride was late, I found myself sidling down to hear what was he saying exactly. And these were his words. I hesitate to say this to such a small audience, but every day is my favorite day. And then he would pause for a moment and say that again. I hesitate, but every day is my favorite day. I was hypnotized. I wrote this down in my notebook a few moments later so I would remember his words exactly. But I thought, this man is my poem of this weight. I will carry his words with me. And what does it have to do with poetry? As a child, I found that poetry helped make our days, if not every single day our favorite day, every day a little bit of a better day, a deeper day, a more listening day. If we read poems, if we wrote poems. It was as if I had discovered how to use a hammer, a tool, an essential human, a spoon, that a poem would help things pause for a second, help us open up to what was in our experience already around us. So my answer is, I don't think you have to look very far. You have to look at the things that you already have and that will keep being given to you as you go along.
Can you talk about how it feels to be in a poem when it has found you or you have found it and you're writing it?
Well, you feel captivated. You feel as if something has spoken to you in a way that you are the vehicle through which a story is coming or an image is coming. You are the maker in one sense, yes, but you're also the listener to something being made through you. William Stafford, a poet whom I quote a great deal, used to say, the artist is someone who lets the material speak back. And as writers, with words and images, we let them give us things. We let them lead us more deeply into the life to come and into what that poem has to share.
How should we listen to poems? As somebody responsible for them, as you are, what do you want in an audience, and what do you want in yourself when you listen to poems?
Well, I think we want to listen to poems in an intimate, personal way, bringing ourselves to the poems we read and hear. What is there in your experience that connects with what you're hearing? What does this remind you of in your own life? You don't have to be shy to do that with a poem, because a poem wants you to be engaged from a personal standpoint. Yesterday we talked about true meanings in poems with teachers. Is there a true meaning to a poem or a single meaning? I sometimes think there can be many layers of meanings in poems, and different people would detect different meanings. But I think a poem also wants us to slow down when we listen to it, not to be racing forward to get to the point or get to the message. I think we've spent a lot too much time talking about the message of a poem. Just listen to the words, listen to the language, listen to what's placed in front of us to look at and think about.
I sometimes think that if the message really mattered, we wouldn't need the poem.
That's right.
We would just have the message.
That's right. And I think it's good.
Save a lot of time.
It's good to read poems out loud to ourselves, and it's good to read poems that we don't fully understand and keep ruminating on them. I love to go back to poems which are mysterious to me and think, has my life changed in some way that I'm able to understand this now? And maybe a poem you loved last year, you read it this year and it'll show you something new about your own life. And the poem hasn't changed, but your life has changed. Your life has added on.
I think maybe we're ready to hear a few poems.
I hope so. When I was a child, I loved the work of Carl Sandburg. And he has a poem in which he advises a little girl to be careful, but not too careful with her own use of words. And maybe that was in my unconscious mind when I wrote a poem. You have to be careful. You have to be careful telling things. Some ears are tunnels. Your words will go in and get lost in the dark. Some ears are flat pans like the miners used, looking for gold. What you say will be washed out with the stones. You look a long time till you find the right ears. Till then, there are birds and lamps to be spoken to, a patient cloth rubbing shine in circles, and the slow, gradually growing possibility that when you find such ears, they already know. Many times my poems will come from a seemingly insignificant scrap of conversation, something someone says that lingers, stays in my ears. This poem was written after visiting the Kickapoo tribe of Indians in northern Mexico. And I was purchasing a pair of moccasins to take home with me. And you really couldn't buy things. They didn't have things for sale. But a grandmother had told me that she had some moccasins, and then I was following her around, and she pulled them out of her dress. She had them with her the whole time. And this was what she said to me. She had made them herself. The title of the poem is Dew, D-E-W, Dew. I think when she said this to me, I hadn't heard anyone mention dew in a long time. A Kickapoo grandmother pulled deer-hide moccasins out of her bosom, said, "If you really want these to fit your feet, walk in the dew a little. Walk in the dew." She lived in a cattail hut, ringed by mountains. There was no road to her house. I think of her every day as I touch the forks and curtains, the pens and melons that line this life, feeling how we grow together, things and the life beyond things, one gradually fitted motion, moving home across the grass. In some poems, we start out in a very specific location, as that poem does, with her in her village. All the houses were astonishingly made of cattail reeds, very beautiful houses. I'd never seen anything like them. We had traveled over dirt 25 miles to get to this place. There was no road of any kind. And the ending part of the located part of the poem, there was no road to her house, leaves us in that scene and then opens up to the part of the poem that continues to think about her, as we do with things that happen in our lives, don't we? I think of her every day. She stays with me when I'm in a city, when I'm in a hotel room, when I move something around. How close her affiliation was with the things she had made. And I started noticing dew again. It was still out there. In this beautiful part of Virginia where we are today, I imagine you have dew. As a child, the library was the center of my universe, and I felt rich when I went into a library. And this was written about those days in St. Louis, walking home with my books. Because of libraries, we can say these things. She is holding the book close to her body, carrying it home on the cracked sidewalk down the tangled hill. If a dog runs at her again, she will use the book as a shield. She looked hard among the long lines of books to find this one. When they start talking about money, when the day contains such long and hot places, she will go inside. An orange bed is waiting, story without corners. She will have 2 families. They will eat at different hours. She is carrying a book past the fire station and the 5 and dime. What this town has not given her, the book will provide. A sheep, a wilderness of new solutions. The book has already lived through its troubles. The book has a calm cover, a straight spine. When the step returns to itself as the best place for sitting, and the old men up and down the street are latching their clippers, she will not be alone. She will have a book to open and open and open. Her life starts here. I think we owe such a great debt of gratitude to all the books which have filled our lives and given us so much to go on. In the poem Valentine for Ernest, I was responding to a request for Ernest Mann from a boy in a middle school who came up to me between classes and said, "Hey, poet, write me a poem," and handed me his address. And it was a strange moment because I had never met him before. And I thought, what do you do with such a direct request? And if it hadn't been Valentine's Day, I'm not sure I would have written this for him. But because it was, I mailed him this that night. You can't order a poem like you order a taco. Walk up to the counter, say, "I'll take 2," and expect it to be handed back to you on a shiny plate. Still, I like your spirit. Anyone who says, "Here's my address, write me a poem," deserves something in reply. So I'll tell a secret instead. Poems hide. In the bottoms of our shoes, they are sleeping. They are the shadows drifting across our ceilings the moment before we wake up. What we have to do is live in a way that lets us find them. Once I knew a man who gave his wife 2 skunks for a Valentine. He couldn't understand why she was crying. I thought they had such beautiful eyes. And he was serious. He was a serious man who lived in a serious way. Nothing was ugly just because the world said so. He really liked those skunks. So he reinvented them as Valentines, and they became beautiful, at least to him. And the poems that had been hiding in the eyes of skunks for centuries crawled out and curled up at his feet. Maybe, if we reinvent whatever our lives give us, we find poems. Check your garage, the odd sock in your drawer, the person you almost like, but not quite. And let me know. That poem also begins in a very specific dialogue with that boy. You can't order a poem like you order a taco, where I'm responding to him in the hall, which came to me later, made me think about it. I order a lot of tacos where I live, so that's a daily kind of transaction. And then, for some odd reason, pulled in this story. I'd heard about the skunks and the Valentines. Maybe I'd heard it the previous year. It was a true story. It didn't happen to me, but I was a witness to hearing the man tell the story. I also saw tears come in the woman's eyes when he told the story that involved her. And then at the end, I kind of open up for all of us, I hope, to our own lives. And something I just thought about that was kind of funny for me, that line, the person you almost like, but not quite. Just admitting that on a piece of paper, that I had that person for myself at the time I wrote this poem, or that we all have those people now and then, it relieved me of that feeling. I never had a bad feeling in the same way again toward that person. It was as if I was refreshed by admitting it. And I think many times poems will cure something in us or connect something in us that we hadn't anticipated, because I wasn't thinking about her at all when I began writing this poem. So in a way, it became sort of a secret Valentine from me to her. She'll never know that, though. They are the shadows drifting across our ceilings the moment before we wake up. That goes back to the idea that they're around us all the time. What we have to do is live in a way that lets us find them. Many times, very small children will focus on those shadows that come into their bedrooms at night. They're a little creepy, a little odd. What do they look like? What do they mean? What's making that shadow? And I think that those shadows, which are trying to give us little messages from the beginnings of our lives, notice me. I can't speak, but I'm out here. I'm the tree outside your bedroom window. I'm the telephone pole. Your voice travels through me. That's an early indicator of all the things that will be around us all our lives. And I think part of our jobs, writing poems and reading poems, is simply to pay better attention to those shadows and to all things. Well, my father grew up in Jerusalem, and I've written, as Jim pointed out to me, more than one poem with that title, and my novel Habibi is also about Jerusalem. From a Palestinian family, he grew up in the Old City, surrounded by Jewish families, Greek families, Armenian families. And over the years, going back to that city, I have been reminded again and again of the situations people must work through in their lives, live through. I'm also reminded when I hear the news, how much is behind every headline we hear. William Stafford said in a poem called Evening News, he speaks to the grass growing in his backyard after watching the evening news flash by on television, and he says, "Oh, please make everything go deep again." And sometimes when we hear so much about what's going on in the world, we need to stop and look at something very close to us to help things go deep again. And I can never think about Jerusalem only in terms of the headlines we get, but in terms of all the people I know there and all the lives that are affected by everything that goes on. So this poem has a quote from Tommy Olofsson, a wonderful poet of Sweden, at the top. And his quote is, "Let's be the same wound if we must bleed. Let's fight side by side, even if the enemy is ourselves. I am yours, you are mine." Well, I transferred that over to Jerusalem. I'm not interested in who suffered the most. I'm interested in people getting over it. Once, when my father was a boy, a stone hit him on the head. Hair would never grow there. Our fingers found the tender spot and its riddle. The boy who has fallen stands up. A bucket of pears in his mother's doorway welcomes him home. The pears are not crying. Later, his friend who threw the stone says he was aiming at a bird, and my father starts growing wings. Each carries a tender spot, something our lives forgot to give us. A man builds a house and says, "I am native now." A woman speaks to a tree in place of her son, and olives come. A child's poem says, "I don't like wars, they end up with monuments." He's painting a bird with wings wide enough to cover 2 roofs at once. Why are we so monumentally slow? Soldiers stalk a pharmacy, big guns, little pills. If you tilt your head just slightly, it's ridiculous. There's a place in this brain where hate won't grow. I touch its riddle, wind and seeds. Something pokes us as we sleep. It's late, but everything comes next.
Thanks.
I don't have it. I need the red secret.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you very much for the reading and for talking about the poems, particularly for talking about the person that you almost like but not quite. I love that line. It was such a, it was like a gift to me also to acknowledge that there are such people in my life, people about whom I felt that, and then I suddenly felt a different way also. I wondered, what am I doing here? What is this about? Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite students in the audience to ask questions. I would also like to invite the viewing audience to call in with questions for Naomi at 1-800-578-1396. While we are waiting for those calls to come in, we can have some questions from the audience.
Hello, my name is Aisha Ware and I attend Garfield Senior High School. Well, I was wondering if all the poems you have written, whether or not you have a favorite. If so, then why?
I don't have a favorite. I try to be hospitable to all my poems, even the ones that nobody ever sees. And, you know, at a particular moment, the poem you're working on is probably your favorite. The poem that you're having trouble with is sometimes your favorite because you're captivated by it. You're trying to figure something out in it.
I was wondering, do you find that your best works, when you write your poems, do you find that I'm trying to say, do you find that when you write your poems, do you use like your bad moods to write your poems or your good moods?
That's a very interesting question because when I was in high school, it used to seem that depression or sadness or loneliness, those things that we would describe as worse moods, were helpful to writing. And that worried me a little bit because I already knew writing was a central part of my life, and I thought, well, does that mean I'm going to have to cultivate a certain attitude of negativity in order to be a writer? But the older you get and the more you write, I think somehow you just sort of click into neutral, and that moods really don't have that much to do with it, and you're able to look at your moods. In fact, writing gives you a place out of your moods sometimes where you can stand back and contemplate a mood or think about what's made you feel that way, sort of work your way through it, work your way out of it. But any sort of mood is, you can click into neutral from any mood. But don't worry if you feel that way when you're young and you're writing, if you feel that your bad moods are giving you a lot of material, because that is bringing you to a very important thing about writing, that writing, as the Texas writer William Goyen used to say, writing starts with trouble in our lives. It doesn't start with peace. It starts with the things that are hard for us. That gives us material, so you can use that. Thank you.
My name is Carolyn Wade, and I'm from Garfield High School. I want to know if you have established a routine for your writing.
Yes, I have. My alarm clock rings at 4 a.m., and if it doesn't ring, I get up at 4 a.m. anyway, and I work 2.5 hours before anyone else gets up in my house every day, and I try to focus only on writing during that time, not answering mail, not doing other things, just writing. And then later on in the day, after the day gets going for other people, I come back to it. But that's my favorite time, is very early, when not many other people in the world are up and at 'em yet. We have a call?
We have a caller from Newark, New Jersey. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, I'd like to ask that if you had any emotional distresses at your childhood, and if so, did that influence your writing?
I appreciate your asking me that question. I think we all have emotional distresses in our childhood, don't we? I haven't ever known anyone who managed to get through childhood without some dose of distress. My childhood was very interesting because I had parents from two sides of the world, so that involved all kinds of cultural exchange and conflict sometimes, as well as the regular growing up things. And there were certainly all of the experiences I had with school, which sometimes we're trying to find our way through education, things that are meaningful to us, the person we want to be, our own identities, shaping it in the midst of all these influences from outside. So yes, there were distresses. And I also grew up in a household where depression was present recurrently. And when you have depression among either parents or siblings or grandparents, I think that gives you something particular to think about and work with.
We have a call from Mesquite, Texas, Naomi's home state.
That's exciting.
Go ahead, caller.
Okay, my name is Rez, and I would like to know if all the poems you chose, did you write all of them?
Yes, the poems I'm reading today, I wrote all of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tasha Bunch from Garfield Senior High School, and I was wondering, how do you feel when you read one of your poems?
Well, I feel as if I'm having a new experience with it, because I've never read it to you as an audience, to you as a listener. So you see there that a poem is a kind of transaction when it's read. When it is performed or read, it becomes something that links us. I hope links us. Now and then, of course, somebody will respond strongly to a poem. Someone else will have no feeling at all for a poem. That's to be expected. But anytime you read a poem, I think you experience it in a new way if you're reading it to new friends. And I'm very grateful for that. As a writer, I don't ever really expect anyone to read my poems. Maybe it's a little odd.
I think it's a little odd.
Well, I really don't expect it, or I don't expect, to me this is an enormous gift to have you here as an audience listening to poems, and to have the people out in the viewing audience as well. That's not something I expect should happen. I'm deeply touched by that. And so that is a new experience each time.
We have a call from Fort Defiance, Virginia. Go ahead, caller.
Yes, my name is Erin Tammick, and I was wondering, after you write a poem, do you ever go back and change your thoughts about it and rewrite it in a different way?
Certainly I do. Thank you for the good question. When you write a poem, I think you should be very kind to yourself and let yourself write what wants to come out at that moment. But then you go back to the poem in a more editorial way, maybe the next day, maybe 2 weeks later, maybe an hour later. You go back to it and you work with it. You might strike out words, add words, rearrange whole sections. Those of you who are computer literate know what a wonderful tool a computer is for doing this. But I still like to write with a pencil on paper best and make all these little arrows and shuffle things around. Then I transfer it over to a computer. But definitely, I love the revision process. And to think of revision as what that word means, as a new vision of the poem, you're not tampering with it. You're not just fixing it. You're envisioning it more. You're enlarging your vision of it every time you go back to it. Now, I do admit that when I was in high school, I did not like to revise as much as I do now. I think it's something you grow into. In high school, I was so consumed with wanting to write, and put so many things down that the thought of going back and working on things was sometimes more tedious than I wanted to engage in. But I would revise my poems, especially the ones I wanted to share with other people. I just didn't love it in the same way that I do now.
There's maybe a danger in coming back and editing too soon.
Yes.
Also, when you're young.
Absolutely.
Which you might talk about.
And yes, you want to allow yourself to write freely as a young writer. You do not want to have that editorial voice standing too close to you saying, that doesn't sound very good. Couldn't you make that better? If you hear that little voice saying, that's not too good, that isn't right, push it away. Say, get back. You have your place, and your place is later. And allow yourself to write as much as you want when you're writing in your notebook, when you're writing your first drafts. Allow yourself to make mistakes. Allow yourself to put down more than you may use later, because that will open the door for your writing, and more will come to you.
Naomi, would you read another poem or two, and then we'll pick up some more questions?
This poem is called The Art of Disappearing. When they say, "Don't I know you?" say, "No." When they invite you to the party, remember what parties are like before answering. Someone telling you in a loud voice, "They once wrote a poem." Greasy sausage balls on a paper plate. Then reply. If they say, "We should get together," say, "Why?" It's not that you don't love them anymore. You're trying to remember something too important to forget. Trees, the monastery bell at twilight. Tell them you have a new project. It will never be finished. When someone recognizes you in a grocery store, nod briefly and become a cabbage. When someone you haven't seen in 10 years appears at the door, don't start singing him all your new songs. You will never catch up. Walk around feeling like a leaf. Know you could tumble any second. Then decide what to do with your time. Now, once a woman came up to me after reading, I had read that poem, and she said, "You didn't mean that, did you?" And I found that a little strange, because of course I did at the moment I wrote it. But I also, as I tried to tell her, I also appreciate parties, good parties now and then, and we all know the difference between them. And I wasn't saying that I don't ever want to talk to anybody or get together. Of course I do. I was giving advice to myself in the poem, how to make myself feel better at a given moment, as well as to one another, ways that we conserve our reservoir, whatever it is, not just getting frittered away and doing anything any old time. So it was a poem that I did mean. But of course, many times there are contradictions involved. You mean it, and then another time you might want to go to that party as well. I think my most touching publishing experience this far has been that the last 3 lines of that poem, walk around feeling like a leaf, know you could tumble any second, then decide what to do with your time, are on a wall in the city of Seattle at the beginning of a walking trail. And they planted trees in memory of some students who died the year that the words were put into this wall. And the students' names are on the wall afterwards. And I was very touched that the students in the school wanted to put those 3 lines as a memorial to their classmates, because they felt their classmates were people who had used their time well. And they planted trees over that line that fall down different colors onto the wall. This poem was written about 10 years after it happened, but it was a very specific experience that did happen. And it came back to me. You know, when you get in the habit of noticing details around you, details will rise up out of the past, out of your memory sometimes, and be given back to you in an interesting way. Wedding cake. Once, on a plane, a woman asked me to hold her baby and disappeared. I figured it was safe, our being on a plane and all. How far could she go? She returned 1 hour later, having changed her clothes and washed her hair. I didn't recognize her. By this time, the baby and I had examined each other's necks. We had cried a little. I had a silver bracelet and a watch. Gold studs glittered in the baby's ears. She wore a tiny white dress leafed with layers, like a wedding cake. I did not want to give her back. The baby's curls coiled tightly against her scalp, another alphabet. I read, "New, new, new. My mother gets tired. I'll chew your hand." The baby left my skirt crumpled, my lap aching. Now I'm her secret guardian, that little nub of dream that rises slightly but won't come clear. As she grows, as she feels ill at ease, I'll bob my knee. What will she forget? Whom will she marry? He'd better check with me. I'll say once she flew, dressed like a cake, between 2 doilies of cloud. She could slip the card in a pocket, pull it out. Already she knew the small finger was funnier than the whole arm.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have a call from Burlington, New Jersey. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, how you doing? I just wanted to say you have this amazing stage presence and this resounding voice. You remind me of Colleen Dewhurst. Would you ever consider a stage career or trying out plays?
Excuse me?
Would you ever consider acting in plays or anything like that? You have this presence that's calling for the stage.
What a very generous compliment. I love watching plays and watching actors. I've never really considered it, but I thank you for even suggesting it. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Maybe tomorrow. I'm honored.
From the audience.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Mallory from Garfield Senior High School, and I would like to know what you suggest to help us with our writings.
Thank you for asking that. One thing I suggest to you all is that you read voraciously, read widely. Sometimes if students come to me and say, I don't like poetry, I say, you just don't like the poems you've read so far. Keep reading. You will find the poems that speak to you, because poems are as various as our lives and our experiences, and you will find a voice that you connect with. It's out there. So read widely. Read as many different voices and from as many different countries as you can. This reading will befriend you. It will make your life feel larger. It's a gift you give yourself. And then I would strongly suggest to all of you that you keep notebooks of your writing. Some people call them journals, whatever you want to call them, in which you put down a few things every day. And I think that regularity is very important. The regularity of the process is much more important than the amount that you write. In some mysterious and wonderful way. Because if you are in the habit of writing things down, more things will be given to you, and you will start noticing them more and more around you. And I urge you to do this whether or not you have any intention of becoming a poet or a writer. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with your own life with words. And all of us, as reading and writing literate human beings, will have a life with words of some kind or another. And I strongly believe that if you feel comfortable writing your own words down, and poetry is one of the most inviting and accessible things we can write in our notebooks, images, scenes, that you will have an easier time of it in your life because you will be comfortable with the pen on the paper.
We have a call from Mesquite, Texas. I think this is our second call from Mesquite, Texas.
Mesquite is tuning in.
Go ahead, caller.
My name is Mike Mayer. I'm a sixth grader from Austin Elementary, and I want to know what inspired you to write The Art of Disappearing, and do you sell your poems for profit?
Do I sell my poems for profit? Well, I'll start with that one. The financial profit to be had from, quote, selling poems is, I think, thankfully, very small. So we do it because we love it. And most poets have to make a living, buy their groceries, by finding some other way to make their living. Many times teaching, talking about poetry, writing magazine articles, something I've done in the past, which I think of as more for profit to be paid than poems. I never think about a profit factor with poems, not at all. The Art of Disappearing was written out of something specific, but somehow that poem has taken on a larger life for me, so I can't remember what the exact scene was, but it was simply one of those moments in which we wish to be a little quiet and contained within ourselves for a while, and we all have those probably every day.
From the audience?
Hi, my name is Joe Hunter, and I attend Garfield Senior High School, and I was wondering if you have ever set any of your poetry to music.
Well, thank you for the question. I haven't set the poems to music. Actually, another person is doing that with some of my poems right now, a man named Bill McKechnie in Maryland. But I have written songs, and to me, songs and poems have always been two separate entities, cousins, but not the same exact family. When I would write songs, I would write the music along with the words. And so I've never set a poem in that way. But I do think they're related, and I love listening to music with lyrics. I adore it, do it all the time. And I think it's very akin to reading poetry sometimes, the mood that it gives us.
We have a call from Queens, New York. Go ahead, caller.
Hi. I was just wondering, I write different things. I write to people, and people always say, oh, you write so beautifully. And I've written some poems, but how do you know if they're any good? Who can you send them to? That would say, oh, they're really good, or that you have something.
Well, one thing to remember that is helpful is that one person might find something good and wonderful, and then someone else might read it and say, huh? And that's happened to most of us. So don't ever take people's either praise or criticism too much to heart. Certainly don't let that be the motivating factor in whether you write or not. There are many magazines and journals out there and anthologies and writing projects going on which welcome writing of young people. And I urge you all to hound your librarians for help in this area. Librarians often have lists. The Teachers and Writers Collaborative in New York City, Poets and Writers Magazine, places that often list magazines and journals that will welcome writing from students. And it's not hard to send your things out, to find a magazine that you want to send to. If they're printing poems by young people, send your work there. One of the little things to remember is always include a self-addressed stamped envelope with the writing that you send out, so that the editor will answer you. And everybody does that, no matter how long you've been publishing poems. But I urge you to get your work out there into the world if you have that feeling that you want to do that. Now, you may not receive immediate publication, but don't let that dissuade you. You may end up in some very interesting correspondences. You may find yourself learning something about your own writing simply through the act of letting it go out from your home and have its own life a little bit.
We have another call from Texas. Go ahead, caller.
Okay. Hi, I'm Matt. How many poems have you written and how many have you published?
Well, Matt, I've never counted the poems I've written and published, so I couldn't answer that question exactly. But I urge you to be generous with how many you write. Don't just say you're going to write one poem a year. Write lots of poems so that you have many to choose from when you go back if someone wants you to share one. But I never counted them up. Yes.
From the
Good
audience.
morning. My name is Brandon Cyphers, and I attend Garfield Senior High School. And I wanted to know, do you become emotionally involved when you're sitting and writing? And if so, how often does this happen?
I hope I'm always emotionally involved with most moments of my life. I hope. Yes, but when you are writing, absolutely, I think it takes you to maybe a deeper level of emotional involvement. And certainly we all have to spend a lot of time in casual conversation where we don't feel maybe that our heart is being tapped in the same way. But when we write, we do. And I think that as human beings, we need to have that replenishing feeling of being in touch with our heart and things most upon our spirits and our minds, the things we want to think about. So writing gives us access into that room of the whole self, the emotion, the spiritual sense, the unconscious, everything. Thank you.
Was your question about sending in writing or about doing the writing? While sitting and writing.
While sitting and writing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see, yeah.
Uh-huh. And sometimes, could I say one other thing? Sometimes it takes you a little while to get to that point, because if you're very active during the day, when you sit down, you don't automatically go into that calm, ruminating state. It takes you a little while. Maybe you have to write for an hour before you really feel a connection coming in. Maybe just 5 minutes. I think the more you write, the more quickly it will happen for you.
Good morning. My name is Heather Moore, and I wondered how you get started on a poem, and then how exactly do you revise that poem?
Thank you, Heather. Well, I'm always in the process of writing down details, little things in my notebook. So those I see as the beginning possibilities for poems, little fragments, quotes, images, things that happen. And then I don't think about revising until I've worked further with the material. The revision is much later. First there's the process of writing down, gathering, and collecting all the little details. William Stafford used to call them wisps, like those little pieces of dust that float through the air. When you see a shaft of light coming down and see little dust floating through it, you're writing those things down as they float through your mind. And then you're working with material, working on poems or working on stories, and then later you're revising. So I think that the revision really needs to be kept in its proper place, which is a later place. But when I go back, I'm just shuffling everything all around. Sometimes I rewrite it on different pieces of paper, scribble it, make it very messy, write in the margins all over, working with it.
We have a call from Westwood, New Jersey. Go ahead, caller.
Good morning, Naomi. I've never, ever read any of your writings. I regret I have never done that. My question to you is, when did you realize that you could reach the stars in your writing? You obviously have plucked one and become one.
Well, you're very kind to say that. I don't know that I ever thought about reaching stars. I'm sort of modest in my range of reach. I did think about wanting to connect to other people as a very little child. And when I wrote my first poem at the age of 6, and my teacher allowed me to post it on the bulletin board in the hallway at school, then I promptly forgot about it. And a few weeks later, a larger girl, a third grader maybe, came up to me and said, "Did you write that poem? I know what you mean." And she ran off. There was an electrical, lightning bolt kind of moment for me that I've never forgotten, where I thought, that's it. That's what writing does. Someone whose name I do not know knows what I mean. What a gift. And I was hooked. I was into the world of writing from then on, because I had seen something amazing happen. It was so simple. But from that very moment, I knew that even if one other person read your poem and knew what you meant, something had been exchanged, and that mattered to me. So I still think in terms of that one person out there who might connect. I do like stars, however. I mean, all kinds of stars. I just never have really thought about reaching for them. But I appreciate your comment.
We just have a moment for one more question and a very quick answer from the audience.
Hi, I'm Lisa. Does the fact that you are a poet affect what you read?
Well, it does. It makes everything I read more delicious, I think, and I find much poetry in prose, and I don't see that these worlds have a strong line between them. I think the worlds of poetry and prose are very closely interlinked. Thank you.
The Prince William Network and the Kennedy Center are pleased to bring you these programs in the Performing Arts Series. A special addition to the series will occur on Friday, April 24th from 11 a.m. to 12 noon with the program titled Understanding Shakespeare, a discussion of the Royal Shakespeare Company's production of Hamlet, to be presented at the Kennedy Center in June. Special guest, Wendy Greenhill of the Royal Shakespeare Company, will discuss approaches to interpreting and performing Shakespeare's plays and will share filmed excerpts from the production with us. I would like to remind the viewers that this fall on September 24th, the Prince William Network will broadcast a live portion of the 1998 Geraldine R. Dodge Poetry Festival from Waterloo, New Jersey. Be sure to register and watch. Thank you. To finish the program, I'm going to ask Naomi to honor us with 2 poems and a song. Naomi.
Thank you, Jim. How far is it to the land we left? On the first day of his life, the baby opens his eyes and gets tired doing even that. He cries when they place a cap on his head. Too much, too much. Later, the whole world will touch him, and he won't even flinch. This poem, which is written with a Spanish title, I was really thinking of my neighborhood where Spanish is the predominant language in the inner city of San Antonio. It includes some airplane quotes and also a sign from the San Antonio Zoo that is posted at an island where some deer live at the zoo. I think you'll be able to tell when that sign comes up. It's called Muchas gracias por todo. Thanks for everything. This plane has landed thanks to God and His mercy. That's what they say in Jordan when a plane sets down. What do they say in our country? Don't stand up till we tell you. Stay in your seats. Things may have shifted. This river has not disappeared thanks to that one big storm when the water was almost finished. We used to say thanks to the springs, but the springs dried up, so we changed it. This rumor tells no truth thanks to people. This river walk used to be better when no one came. What about the grapes? Thanks to the grapes, we have more than one story to tell. Thanks to a soft place in the middle of the evening. Thanks to 3 secret hours before dawn. These deer are seldom seen because of their shyness. If you see one, you count yourself among the lucky on the earth. Your eyes get quieter. These deer have nothing to say to us. Thanks to the fan, we are still breathing. Thanks to the small toad that lives in cool mud at the base of the zinnias. Thank you. Thank you. The song is called Questions, and when I began writing this song, I had no idea where it was going. And so I sing it to you with that trust that we may begin writing things and they will carry us to another place. I was a little surprised when horses came into this song because I don't really ride them. I like them, but they came in on their own.
Lately I've had questions about what I really need. Is there something that I'm missing? Something I should read? Is there someone to accept us just the ways we're bound to be? About all I've got is I laugh a lot, and I really love this freedom. The wind is all that I breathe. The gypsies were my neighbors when I was very small. They would pitch their tents at night. They didn't need too much at all. You could see them with their children and the sheep they'd always tend. In a gypsy's ring they'd dance and sing, and their journeys never ended. Those journeys had no end. Tie my horses to the wagon, I am leaving for the west. There is no place I love better than this roaming I love best. Like the stones that line the deserts and get played upon by time, I will learn that smooth old rhythm that makes every move a rhyme. We may get lonesome in the evenings when the silence gets so deep. We may sing ourselves to sleep more than we know. But the trees will never leave us, and the moon will always bless, and the voices of our choices will continue to say yes. My cat achieved his sainthood by sleeping all day long, and the birds don't have much baggage but their feathers and a song. I've seen a lizard crawl up walls as if the walls are just a floor. You make a simple pact with the simple facts, and you'll find you don't need much more. You'll find you don't need more.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good, Naomi. Terrific. Terrific. Talk to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for listening. Anybody like to talk about anything else? Wish we could go on a hike. I'll bet you know some good paths around here. Yes, someone in the back? Who's my favorite poet? Well, yes, I have many, many favorite poets. Since I was 15, William Stafford has been my most beloved poet. But I love poems by so many people in the world. And there are so many favorites that I hesitate to name any, because then it's as if I'm